Hello again, this is Professor McCartan on another topic, service and the gap model. Now, when we think about the service industry, we don't realize how much and how large the service industry is and how it affects us every day and just the characteristics of the service industry. So we break the service industry down into the aspect of four categories. Intangibility, inseparability, heterogeneity, and perishability. Now, service is the result of applying human or mechanical efforts to people or objects. So this is some form of involving a deed, a performance, or an effort, some form of effort that cannot be physically possessed. So a little bit different in that aspect. Now, when we look at the service industry in the United States, we see that there's a lot of industries from healthcare to retail, financial services, and even if you think about it, technology. So what do I mean by intangibility? Intangibility means that it's the inability of a service to be touched, seen, tasted, heard, or felt in the same manner that goods can be sensed, okay? And there are some ways that we qualify and evaluate the quality of service. One is called the search quality, and that's the characteristic that we can look at and see if it's easily assessed before the purchase of the product. Then there's the experience quality, which is that characteristic that we can assess after the service has been performed. Or there's the credence quality, which I think is always the most confusing for students. And that is the characteristic that can be difficult to assess even after a purchase, just because the lack of the customer's necessary knowledge or experience. So for instance, if I went and got my oil change done, I don't know how to change my oil, so I don't have the ability to assess and make sure that the individuals change my oil correctly, if that makes sense to you. And then there's also inseparability. Inseparability is the inability of the production and consumption of a service to be separated. Consumers must be present during the production. So this means if I'm going to get a haircut, I have to be present. I can't be separated from the hairdresser. It's impossible for the hairdresser to be able to cut my hair. Heterogeneity, though, is the variability of the inputs and outputs of services, which causes services to be less standardized and uniformed than goods. So, for instance, Apple produces iPhones, and typically we expect that every iPhone is going to be the same. Or if we go to a restaurant and we get a McDonald's burger, we expect for the most part that it's going to be the same because it was franchised and they all have the rules and the same product and it's all standardized and uniformed. But because there's a service involved there, it might not necessarily be because of human error, correct? Or, for instance, if you were to go get your hair done again and a different hairdresser, or maybe the same hairdresser, but she was having a bad day and she cut your hair a little too short. That would be that thought process behind heterogeneity. And then there's perishability. And this is the inability to be able to take the service and store it, warehouse it, or inventory it. So that you wouldn't be able to store it. So when I think of a perishability aspect, I look at the fact that a movie theater, when you go to the movie theater, they might offer a discount on Tuesdays, and then you go and you purchase that ticket on Tuesday. It's perishable. It's only on Tuesday. You can't store, well, at least legally, you can't store the movie that you just watched. And moving forward, you guys learned a little bit as you're reading your text and kind of growing through the information of service industry, the fact that there is service quality, and customers evaluate and look for service quality by reliability, responsiveness, assurance, empathy, as well as tangibles. And you learned a little bit about the fact that there might be some gaps. And the gap model was produced back in the 1980s to kind of help with looking at the inconsistencies that you receive in service. And the individuals that looked at this, they wanted to analyze and kind of just give some thought process between an organization's service quality performance against what a customer service quality needed or wanted or desired. So when we look at that, we look at your text talks about four gap models, and the gap that they talk about is the knowledge gap, the standard gap, the delivery gap, and the communication gap. And so when you're looking at that, you can see that the knowledge gap is the gap between what customers want and what management thinks customers want. And then the standard gap is the gap between what management thinks customers want and the quality specifications that management develops to provide the service. And then the delivery gap is the gap between the service quality specifications and the service that is actually provided, as well as the communication gap, which is the gap between what the company provides and what the customer is told that they provide. And sometimes we always call that the bait and switch. Now, your text doesn't talk about the fifth one, but the additional gap is the gap between the service that customers receive and the service that they want. So I try to identify all five, even though I don't have it there on the point for you, just so you're aware that there is an additional gap that we typically look at in the service industry, and that's the gap between what the services that customers receive versus what they want. Now, I will say that the service industry is a little bit different versus the product industry, because the fact that in services we are possession processing, people processing, mental stimulus processing, and information processing. And just so you understand the difference, people processing is when we receive a haircut. Possession processing is when we take our dog to the groomer or our dry cleaning to the dry cleaners to get cleaned, our suit or whatnot. Mental stimulus would be something in the form of going to a basketball game or a football game. And then information processing would be seeking legal advice or some form of this class could be conformed either way, information processing or mental stimulus, depending on your thought process behind the service, so to speak. So overall, when we're looking at service, understanding that there is the gap model that exists, and looking at identifying that helps individuals in the service industry to be able to evaluate and make sure that they're offering that service quality. Service quality is evaluated by reliability, responsiveness, assurance, empathy, intangibles. And you also learn the fact that between the different types of characteristics of service, which they're intangibility, inseparability, heterogeneity, and perishability. Until next time, this is Professor McCartan. Take care.